Hey everyone! It's been over a year since NVIDIA launched their first RTX cards, bringing real-time ray tracing to PC with their Turing architecture. But after an initial look at it back in January of last year, I haven't really touched on it at all that much on my channel since. But NVIDIA reached out to me and asked if I wanted to revisit ray tracing on the RTX 2060, with a focus on 1080p 60fps gameplay based on a guide that they've published that includes system specs and game settings. I haven't done a video like this before, but I was genuinely intrigued to experience NVIDIA's vision for PC gaming as we start 2020, exactly as they intend for it to be experienced. So let's take a look at the parts that I'm going to be using in this build. The RTX 2060 is the entry-level RTX card, so it's important that the rest of the build complements its mid-range status. The reviewer's guide suggests a sub $900 system that uses an Intel i5 9600K and a Gigabyte Z390 UD motherboard. However, I don't get to build many systems, so I took the opportunity to come up with what I would build for an RTX 2060 with a budget of around £800. Personally, I'd go the AMD route of a Ryzen 5 3600 and an MSI B450 Tomahawk Max motherboard, because it's a little cheaper and offers hyperthreading, so 12 threads instead of the 9600K6. I couldn't get the exact parts I was after though, with the CPU being the 3600X and the motherboard, SSD and rear case fan also differing. So some parts ended up costing a little more than the ones I would have gone for, and my white, black, silver colour theme is completely ruined. But everything is close enough in my opinion that this should give you a pretty good idea of the performance that's possible at this price point. This is a really fun but challenging price point to work with. You have to be careful not to get too carried away on any of the components outside of the CPU and GPU. Because, for example, the 2060 Super is only around £70 more expensive than the 2060. And you can easily upsell yourself on the other parts by that amount, and end up leaving additional game performance on the table. With that said, you shouldn't cut back on the other components too much, even if that would allow you to go with a better CPU or GPU. The power supply, for example, is one part that you can definitely save some money on, but absolutely do not want to cheap out on. The one I'm using in this build is a 520W Seasonic Modular 80 Plus Bronze power supply, which I think strikes the right balance. Another area that you can cut back on, but probably shouldn't go too far on, is the case. I know this is purely subjective, and you may not agree with me, but if you have a cheapo case sat on your desk next to you, it just makes the entire build look and feel cheap, when you can get like a high-end looking and performing case for around £70 nowadays. The Corsair iCue 220T has a tempered glass side panel and came with 3 RGB intake fans. You could buy a cheaper case, but then you'd have to buy fans separately, so you could end up spending this much, if not more anyway. All I'm saying is don't spend £800 on a PC and then have like a potato looking thing on your desk, like there's just no need nowadays. Going with an AMD CPU for this build allows me to save a little money on the cooler, as it comes with a Ray Stealth cooler in the box. A CPU cooler is one of those components that's very easy to swap out down the road, so that money is best put into other components for the initial configuration. This build only has a 512GB NVMe SSD, but I tend to download a game, complete it and then uninstall it, so this would work out just fine for me, and it's enough space to hold the 5 AAA games that I'll be testing today, with room to spare. I don't recommend buying a hard drive for gaming if you can help it. The next generation of consoles are going to use NVMe SSDs, and I think, or at least hope, that we're going to see the speed of those drives utilised in ways that will make hard drive based gaming a thing of the past. Running a hard drive already puts you below the recommended specs for a game like Star Citizen. But anyway, this is the finished build. Ignoring the colour theme, I think it turned out great. I see plenty of builds that cost way more than this and don't look as nice, so I'm still chalking this up as a win. But how well does it ray trace? The entire reason NVIDIA wanted me to make this video is because they want to tackle the common misconception that the RTX 2060 can't ray trace in 1080p at 60fps. I'm going to be following NVIDIA's guides for the game settings exactly, so that part is out of my hands, and I'm just going to try and keep an open mind and give everything a fair chance. Even with DLSS, which wasn't well received at launch, but has since had some updates. Ultimately, the visuals and frame rates will either impress, or they won't. So let's dive in. Starting with Call of Duty Modern Warfare in 1080p max settings with ray tracing on. Ray tracing in this game affects the shadows formed by spotlights and interior lighting. Now, if you start playing with ray tracing on, while everything looks great, it can be hard to pinpoint immediately where the benefits are, but if you turn ray tracing off, then you can see the immediate graphical downgrade to the environment, as objects no longer cast accurate shadows and begin to separate themselves from the environment. But let's be honest, no one plays Call of Duty staring at walls. The more important improvement comes in the form of the overall atmosphere of locations, like within this seemingly normal London home in this room, which certainly sets the scene for the rest of the house that you're about to see. It's quite cinematic, and I mean that in the best possible way, with care and attention given to how lighting can be used to create an atmosphere or tell a story. Now, if I turn ray tracing off, there can be no denying that at least some of that atmosphere is lost, as harsh and unrealistic shadows are cast onto the floor. And it's this atmosphere that can be noticed even when playing at speed. But if you do stop shooting and look around, the improvements are everywhere, and with ray tracing off, shadows can almost seem retro and out of place in comparison to the rest of the visuals. In terms of performance, I found the FPS stayed comfortably above 60 FPS. The next game I tried was Control, and this uses one of the most ambitious implementations of ray tracing that we've seen so far. Unfortunately, this means it's also quite difficult to run. The NVIDIA recommended settings are 1080p, but with DLSS turned on, which creates a 1080p image using a 720p render resolution, then high settings and ray tracing set to high, which turns on every RT feature. Whilst the textures are a little soft, especially around your character model, ray tracing adds a large improvement to the atmosphere and overall visuals of the game. The environment becomes cleaner and more clinical, and to be honest, a little more eerie with the almost unnaturally polished floors. Control was a well-deserving winner of Best Art Direction at the Game Awards, and in my opinion, ray tracing is a must if you want to enjoy the game to its fullest. There's some comparisons in this game that are big enough to be like a console generation leap forward in terms of graphical quality. For performance, my frame rate averaged around 60 FPS, but that means that it did dip into the high 50s. Next up is Battlefield 5. Again, we see DLSS in the recommendations, with high graphical settings and high ray tracing. There's really not much to say about ray tracing in this game that hasn't already been said. It should be noted, however, that it has had a lot of efficiency improvements to ray tracing since the original launch of DXR, and DLSS has been improved as well. Textures are still softer than I'd personally like to see from an £800 gaming system, which I'm sure could easily manage 1440p gaming in non-ray traced titles. But where reflections do make an appearance, the differences are huge. For performance, I played the first part of this level and saw that the frame rate mostly stayed in the high 60s during heavy ray trace scenes, with the occasional dip into the 50s. But it did increase to 70 to 80 FPS in later gameplay, where reflections were less prominent. On to Metro Exodus. Now this is supposed to be played on ultra settings with high ray tracing and DLSS on, but I actually found myself turning DLSS off in the parts of the game I played, as performance was close enough to 60 without it. Metro Exodus uses ray tracing for global illumination, and in practice I'd say the difference ray tracing makes here is quite subtle, with most of the side-by-side comparisons I made showing only minor differences. Where there were larger differences though, there are occasions that I'd actually prefer the visuals of ray tracing off from an artistic point of view, even if the lighting was less realistic when you actually start analysing where the light is coming from and how it would actually look in real life. However, it still has its moments of mastery though, like check out the lighting in this room, and in particular with the objects on the shelf. With ray tracing off, it's like there's a fake light source in the room. I also found that the colour of the walls and objects were more realistically rendered, taking into account the light source and the surroundings. I've heard that the later levels of the game are more intensive, so turning on DLSS would give me the performance bump needed if frame rate became a problem, albeit with a hit to image sharpness. Next, we have Shadow of the Tomb Raider. This is 1080p in the high preset and with ray tracing set to high. As with Call of Duty, there is no DLSS being recommended here. Now, I don't want to venture too far into this game because I still haven't had the chance to play Rise of the Tomb Raider yet, and I don't want the trilogy spoiled. Shadow of the Tomb Raider uses ray tracing for shadows, and from what I've noticed in my limited playtime, shadows cast from sunlight are taken to a new level of realism, with softer, more diffused edges. Traditional shadows in this game are still very good, but look unrealistically harsh in comparison. Point light shadows get an even bigger improvement though. Objects lit by candles react to that candle light in a way that I've never seen in a game before. It's like this entire area was designed to test ray tracing. For me, the game ran at anywhere from mid-50s to almost 100 FPS, depending on the scene. And whilst I was making this video, Wolfenstein Youngblood was updated to include ray tracing and DLSS. I have to say though, I do hope that going forward, games are launched with ray tracing included from day one. Wolfenstein Youngblood isn't included in my NVIDIA RTX 2060 ray tracing guide, but looking at the videos that they've published, it doesn't seem like there's going to be any problems ray tracing on Uber settings with DLSS off, and running the couple of in-game benchmarks confirms this to be the case. It's immediately obvious what type of ray tracing has been implemented here, real-time reflections, and it adds a boost to the reflectivity of surfaces, which can add a lot more visual interest in the environment. In some areas, ray tracing on actually fixes inaccuracies with the game's reflections, but I think this says more about the standard implementation being bad than it does about ray tracing being good. But overall it's a nice addition to the game and can be enjoyed entirely without me having to worry about my frame rate dipping below my 1080p 60 target. So conclusion time. NVIDIA wanted me to make a video to prove that the RTX 2060 can in fact ray trace in 1080p at 60 FPS. And with 3 out of the 6 games shown, I can confidently say that it can. Well, 4 out of the 6 if you include Metro Exodus. However, with Control and Battlefield 5, it all comes down to your opinion on DLSS. I went to Twitter with the poll, is 1080p with DLSS on and a render resolution of 720p actually 1080p gaming? And everyone who responded with no to that question is still going to think that in those titles, the RTX 2060 isn't a 1080p 60fps ray tracing card. I'm very conflicted on this point myself. What I can say is that I played Control on my personal gaming PC in 4K, on my 2080 Ti with DLSS on, and I was actually quite impressed with it. I certainly wouldn't trade ray tracing for native resolution in this title, but I also look forward to future generations of graphics cards, which allow me to have my cake and eat it too. But focusing on things that I can be a little more definitive on, the build. For around £800 at the time of purchase, I'm extremely impressed with it and what's possible at this price point. It's a great time to be a PC gamer. There's just 2 things I'd recommend considering upgrading, if you can stretch your budget at all. The cooler, more on this in a future video if you're interested, but also the RTX 2060. I liked the card when I first tested it, and I still like it now. However, if you are looking to ray trace similar to how I have in this video, but with future unreleased titles over the next couple of years, then it would be nice to have the extra performance headroom above 60 FPS that the RTX 2060 Super would give you, and the extra 2GB of VRAM would come in handy too. So I hope you found this video somewhat helpful. If you liked it, please hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already and you want to see more of my videos. Thank you so much to my patrons for making everything possible, and thank you for watching.